Please welcome to the stage from Autodesk, Chief Sustainability Officer, Joe Speicher.
They said my name right. Thank you, guys. It's awesome. It's very rare that that happens. Good morning, everybody. It is great to be here with so many people who are actually doing the work. The builders, the operators, the problem solvers who are driving the construction industry forward. So, before I get started, I want to address the obvious question. What is a chief sustainability officer doing here at a conference about construction? And that is a fair question. You are probably thinking you're going to get a lecture about sorting your recyclables, replacing your fleet with bicycles, and feeling mildly guilty about your concrete usage. I'm not here to talk about virtue. I'm here to talk about revenue, regulation, risk, and what it's going to take to win the next decade of work. What I want to talk about today is something that every leader in this room cares deeply about. How do we protect margins? How do we reduce risk? How do we deliver projects with certainty in a world that is becoming more uncertain by the day? Because as a chief sustainability officer, my job is not, despite appearances, to sell ideals. My job is to meet with construction industry leaders, understand where your pressures are coming from, and figure out how technology can help you deliver a better business. And before I have any of these conversations, I like to ground the discussion in a few simple truths about our industry. I've already mentioned a few of them. So, scale, as we all know, is exploding. Margins are thin, risks are rising. At the same time, labor shortages are not going away. Projects are becoming more complex. Owners want more certainty on cost, on schedule, on outcomes, all in an increasingly uncertain environment. And your teams are being asked to deliver all of that faster, smarter, and often at a lower cost. This is the operating environment that we all exist in. Now, consider sustainability, which for many leaders in this room is where the tension shows up. It can feel like one more constraint, one more requirement, one more thing to manage when your teams are already stretched thin. But what if that framing is wrong? What if sustainability isn't a burden, but the biggest opportunity that we've got to fundamentally improve project delivery? So let's ground this in facts. As you can see, buildings and construction today roughly account for 32% of total energy usage globally, as well as 34% of carbon emissions. That's not a footnote, that's a signal, and it's a very strong signal at that, because it means that construction isn't just part of the climate conversation, it is the switchboard. Now, I want to make a very quick point here. We are on an inexorable march towards a lower carbon future. I can give you all kinds of statistics that showcase that. One of the best is that 40% of all energy generated on the grid last year was from renewable sources, including nuclear. The US and the EU have already reached peak emissions, meaning they are growing their economy while reducing carbon emissions. And it looks like the world's biggest carbon emissions emitter, China, has just achieved that same feat last year, flattening their emissions. This has implications for our industry overall. What happens upstream in design, planning, and procurement determines what's even possible downstream. And here's the key insight. Sustainability at its core is a data problem. When your teams don't have trusted data, we get waste, we get rework, we get delays, and we get decisions that drive cost and risk that we didn't plan for and cannot easily undo. So, data can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. When I meet with Autodesk customers, we talk about the data that gets created and often lost in a few key areas: quantities and assemblies, specs, submittals, product data, including environmental product declarations, EPDs. If you don't know what those are, come talk to me after the fact. I spend my life with EPDs. Schedule, logistics, lead times, and the place where risk gets really hairy: procurement packages and alternates and substitutions. Imagine the amount of information moving through each of those streams. Some of it's on paper, some of it's in the cloud, and consider how much of it gets reset or dropped every time the project moves from phase to phase. The data loss creates a fundamental breakdown in project delivery, and it costs you and your businesses time, labor, and resources. Because when information resets between these phases, you need to reprice the risk. And as we all know, somebody pays for it. And here's the thing: carbon is one of the costs hiding in those resets. When you can't trace what you're buying, installing, changing, you cannot manage cost, schedule, or carbon with any sort of confidence. But when that data is connected across people, across phases, across decisions, it suddenly becomes operational. And it's worth demystifying what we mean when we say the word sustainability. Also means lots of different things to lots of different people. It is a set of levers that many of you are already pulling, whether you know it or not. Carbon management is about understanding the costs and risks embedded in materials and procurement decisions. Energy efficiency is about assets that cost less to operate. Water efficiency is about resilience in a world of increasing scarcity. And resilience itself is about making assets that perform under stressors like weather, supply chain disruptions, or operational failure. This is what we talk about when we say the word sustainability, and I'm sure you're familiar with many of these concepts. When you zoom out, sustainability is not about trading one risk for another. It's about delivering better outcomes with fewer surprises. And what has changed, and this is important, is where sustainability issues show up in the process. For a long time, it's been treated as a downstream fix: reports at the end, compliance after the fact. Today, sustainability is moving upstream in early planning, site design, pre-construction, and estimating. And that shift matters because the biggest opportunities to reduce carbon, risk, and cost happen before the first pour. For many companies, if you miss the opportunity in pre-construction, you'll pay for it in last-minute substitutions, procurement churn, and scheduling delays. That's why we're seeing sustainability evolve from a response to regulation to a lever for transforming how projects are delivered. And it's already happening. So at Autodesk, we issue an annual report, the State of Design and Make. Last year, we did a focus on construction, and 95% of construction companies surveyed said that they are taking steps to be more sustainable. That is not ideological, that is momentum. And let's be clear, some of this is driven by regulation. Particularly here in North America, it's driven by various states. In Europe and increasingly in Asia Pacific, the public sector is rewriting procurement requirements to focus on carbon alongside cost, and that is slowly happening here in the US as well. Much of it, however, is driven by something far more practical. Leaders are realizing that integrating sustainability into existing processes improves performance. So, if you're focused on reducing rework, if you're focused on improving coordination, increasing predictability, protecting margins, you are already going down this road. I know you're not here for buzzwords or jargon, so let's make this concrete. Construction industry joke? Anybody get? Thank you. Got a couple laughs. Let's consider how this translates into a margin protection equation. I'm not going to focus on math here. When you connect data across your technology and teams, you get fewer RFIs, fewer change orders, and less rework. When material options are evaluated during pre-construction, not after buyout, you avoid last-minute substitutions that will erode margin. When you model cost, schedule, and carbon together during pre-bid, you reduce surprises and, importantly, the need for contingencies. This protects margin through clarity, not through guesswork. And you don't need a grand transformation to start. What we believe construction companies need is better decisions earlier, carried through estimating, buyout, and delivery. At Autodesk, that means bringing sustainability closer to where the work is actually happening and not siloing it in a separate function. For construction teams, that means how do we make better decisions earlier with the same workflows, with the same people, without slowing anyone down. That is the foundation for everything else. And that brings us to technology, because this is where sustainability stops being aspirational and starts becoming scalable. So what DPR is doing in Silicon Valley, DPR Construction, doing in Silicon Valley for its new office is a signal to the industry. They've topped off their building with mass timber instead of steel, cutting embodied carbon and proving that lower carbon materials can scale in commercial construction. The building is designed to be net zero energy and net zero certified, and it is more than just an office. It's a prefab facility embedding low carbon thinking into the materials that they are delivering to their clients. And that impact multiplies. This matters because every contractor, every owner, every developer is going to face the same pressure. Build faster, stay competitive, and increasingly cut the carbon emissions associated with the project. This project with DPR shows it's possible to do all three of these things. And this is how innovation moves, not through policy papers or policies themselves, but through real buildings that prove how the model works. That's what's happened at Denver International Airport as well. I don't know if anybody's flown through there recently. They've gotten through the construction phase. It's quite nice now. They've modernized one of the busiest airports in the country, and they didn't shut it down. They had hundreds of teams working in parallel, coordinating in real time, solving issues before they hit the field. Why does this matter? Because this is now the reality for all of us. Projects are more complex, margins are tighter, expectations around sustainability and performance keep getting higher. The teams that win are the ones who can collaborate at scale, reduce rework, and make smarter decisions earlier. That is not a future vision. That is the new standard. But I want to acknowledge something directly. For many teams, bringing carbon emissions into bid decisions is new. This feels risky. Here's what's changed, though: the risk calculus. The bigger risk is not being able to answer those questions for the owner. Increasingly, if you can't quantify it, you lose bids, you lose relevance, and you watch the work go somewhere else. In other words, carbon is becoming how qualification gets decided. And that's why we at Autodesk are embedding sustainability directly into the tools that teams already use. So it's a normal part of delivery, not an extra burden off to the side. And with that, I would like to invite my friend and colleague, Lalith Subramanian, Autodesk VP of Product Management and Engineering, to the stage to show exactly how our product teams are embedding sustainability into the tools that teams already use. Please join me in welcoming Lalith. Don't forget that.
Can't forget the clicker. Thank you, and good morning. So I work in tech and AI every day, so I think you can guess what I'm going to say next, which is that sustainability is fundamentally a data problem. Everything is a data problem to us. But in construction, it's interesting. If you look at every major breakthrough in the last 20 years, we've always seen the same pattern. The first thing you do is to connect information across the project lifecycle, make it visible earlier in the project lifecycle, reduce uncertainty, and margins improve, schedule improves, and costs improve. This is the pattern that's been followed over the last 20 years. Now, today, if you look at all the variables that are open to us, carbon, energy, material waste, procurement, risk, insurance scrutiny, owner reporting requirements, regulations. These are all not theoretical pressures. These are all operating variables, operational variables that we have to take into account at scale. And the only way to do that is with connected data. That's the only way we have visibility and reduce uncertainty. So at Autodesk, we think about this problem very simply. If sustainability is a data problem, then digital transformation is really the multiplier that makes you or enables you to handle it. Not because software magically reduces carbon footprints, it's because connected workflows change how and when decisions are made in construction. And in this industry, timing is absolutely everything, as you all know. The biggest cost, schedule, and carbon decisions happen long, long before any of your crews ever mobilize on site. So they happen in site selection, concept modeling, estimation, procurement strategy, trade coordination, and if all of those decisions are made in one isolated pocket, then all the surprises happen downstream, driving not the best outcomes in cost and schedule and timing. If those decisions are made in a connected environment, you have options. And options are really the leverage that you have to drive better outcomes in your project management. So let's make this concrete. Concrete, once again, a concrete joke. So let's look at embodied carbon and materials. So for decades, the way that we have focused on estimation is on cost and availability primarily. And obviously, that was the best thing to do. But today, what we're finding is that forward-looking teams are actually evaluating cost, availability, lead time, and carbon intensity, all at the same time. So how do they do that? To get to that point, they use tools like digital takeoff, integrated with the data management solutions that are part of your project management lifecycle. And for example, GCs like Atona Construction are beginning to assemble material packages not just on dollars per cubic yard, but to take carbon considerations up front and look at kilograms of CO2 per cubic yard. That's a simple way of using data to drive better outcomes. Now, the best thing about it is that with the data being available early on in the process, it doesn't slow the teams down. It gives them negotiating power, right, when you think about it? Because once carbon is quantified early, you can engage your suppliers differently, you can procure differently, you can reduce over-ordering, reduce waste, and align with your owner ESG goals or other regulations. So carbon becomes just another performance metric. It's another piece of data that you're managing, like cost and your schedule. So let's zoom out a little. Material decisions are just one part of this equation, right? We all know that waste is another part of it. So our investment in QFlow, which is a company that actually focuses on improving waste tracking, material procurement in the field, actually targets eliminating or reducing the waste. So today on many job sites, as we all know, waste tracking is manual or sometimes not even done very well. But when you have software that works in the field to track waste and waste streams, what you realize is that you can reduce or improve your over-ordering patterns. You can reduce your waste. You can reduce your disposal issues. You can align your procurement with the percentage of waste that you see happening in real time in the field. So that's not just about optics. It improves your operational efficiency because every dumpster that you don't fill is material that you didn't pay for twice and improves your sustainability. Simple as that. Now, let's talk about coordination as well, because this is where digital transformation becomes absolutely non-negotiable. As Joe was saying, rework is one of the hidden carbon drivers that we have, because rework burns materials, labor, and time on every single project. And yeah, you do actually burn carbon as well. Now, connected coordination environments like the Autodesk Construction Cloud, soon to be Autodesk Forma, is where you start dealing with these kinds of challenges up front. So eliminating RFIs or reducing RFIs, clash-related delays, and so on, that affect downstream project management and waste. So that's not a sustainability tool. That ends up becoming a performance tool. So earlier coordination upfront in project becomes a sustainability and a performance tool. Now, we can look at this globally as well. As Joe was mentioning, the EU and Asia Pacific are leaders in this area. In Europe, we're starting to see requirements for the digital product passports. What is a digital product passport? It ensures that the material you select is completely filled with a traceable record of its origin, as well as everything that happened to that material before you choose it and use it on a project. Now, that's interesting because that data is invaluable in establishing how your carbon footprint is in a project. That's not a future concept, but that's happening right now as we speak. And firms are having to operate with this data in a connected environment. And if they do not implement a digital transformation that connects these workflows, they'll be scrambling later on if they have to deal with these regulations in the future. And we've all seen this happening. If you don't make the transformation fast, you're scrambling at the end and reacting to regulations or reacting to state regulations or country regulations and so on. So this is a very, very important thing, the connection of data through these connected workflows, leading to better decisions up front and reducing downstream challenges. Plus, this is a huge, powerful feedback loop that's available that can unlock your sustainability. Now, when data flows from planning and design through construction and operation, it doesn't end there. Future projects get smarter. So it's not one project that gets better, but the output of that project, energy, performance data, maintenance cycles, material degradation patterns, all of those feed back into the next project. Now, if this information is trapped in PDFs, as Joe was mentioning earlier, it never passes on to the next project. The beauty of digital connection of this data means that if your data lives in a single platform and is connected across the workflows, across the life cycle of a project, then your information advantage compounds. So all of this data flows back into the next project, improving the next project, and so on and so forth. So sustainability is not a one-time thing, but it becomes a systemic improvement. Now just think about it. With all of this wonderful AI in the world, all that data that you gather from one project starts becoming extraordinarily valuable to the next and the next project forever. Now, let's talk about something really important. Labor. Every contractor feels it daily, and we cannot solve labor shortages by asking fewer and fewer people to do more and more manual coordination of all of this data that's available. Digital workflows fundamentally reduce friction. So they reduce paperwork because the data is available online wherever they need it, more like a water system in a house where the information flows to whoever needs it and whenever they need it. So they make work sites and job sites more predictable. What our State of Design and Makes report shows is that digitally mature companies have an easier time attracting and retaining talent in construction. Why? It's pretty simple. The next generation of builders, and that's probably not us, right? It's our kids and grandkids. They actually want technology. They expect technology, they use technology every day, and they expect that the tools that they use at work are every bit as good as your Uber Eats and the Maps app and everything else that they work with in their daily lives. And best of all, they all expect their purpose to not be a trade-off against the efficiency of how they do their work. They want their purpose tied to the efficiency of the tools they get at the workplace. And that's the best way to get young kids into construction, after all. So when sustainability metrics are embedded into dashboards alongside cost and schedule, et cetera, it's not a side initiative. It becomes fundamental to how the business runs. We're actually seeing the shift in the US. Populous, which is a company, GC based in Kansas City, is applying productization and prefabrication in a very, very interesting way. So I don't know how many of you know cricket. It's a game that's played and a few billion people are crazy about it in the world. Populous is building a cricket World Cup stadium in Nassau, in New York, for the World Cup. And they're assembling this stadium deliberately with materials that can be disassembled and reused. What that means is that that stadium not only comes up for a massive World Cup for cricket, but it can be disassembled and then used for any other stadium. For example, a baseball stadium in Atlanta the next time around. No waste left behind. And now this kind of outcome doesn't happen because you report at the end of construction. It happens when digital models and standardized components and prefabrication and constructability planning starts from the very beginning. So when design intent connects directly to all of the downstream processes, when data flows all the way through, that's not just reactive sustainability, that's actually sustainable performance that's engineered in forever. So these are not green pilot projects. These are actually business-led transformations where sustainability actually improved execution. And that is the key here. Digital workflows plus connected data really enable things to be more measurable, more repeatable, and scalable. You just can't optimize what you can't measure and see, and you cannot scale what you cannot standardize, right? We all know that. And you certainly cannot future-proof it. So when Joe says that construction is a switchboard for climate action, he's right. But you know what? A switchboard needs connections. It needs the circuits to be wired together. And that's the role of the platforms, to connect design, pre-con, construction, operations, supply chain, all of it in one continuous, unified data environment. So cost, carbon, quality, risk, all of it can be evaluated together, not sequentially, and not reactively, but strategically to gain an advantage. And I want to be clear about something. This isn't really about perfection or lecturing. It's about direction. So the companies that are gaining advantage in this area are not waiting for perfect data. They're starting off in a small way, taking steps towards this. They have a North Star, and they start putting in place digital takeoff, connected coordination, field-to-office data flows, supplier transparency, real-time waste tracking, and then slowly building this up. And once they get all this data together, then the magic starts happening. Sustainability starts improving business outcomes. So the next project will always be better than the last one. And in the near future, you're going to have, as I said, AI that continuously keeps improving the project outcomes and your choices ahead of when the problems could potentially occur. So every connected workflow creates options for you. And when you have options in material choices, procurement, locations, anything else, that is actually a competitive advantage. Information and the choices are your competitive advantage. So sustainability doesn't just become scalable through policy or regulations. It becomes scalable with the variety of data that we have because of the platforms that enable it, through shared data, through earlier decisions, feedback loops within the project and across the projects, through teams that can see the options well before they ever pour any concrete. That's the multiplier, and that's the key. So that's why digital transformation is really fundamentally coupled with decarbonization. It's actually the engine behind it. So with that, let me invite Joe back on stage for a chat. Thank you. Hey.
All right, Lalith, that was great. Thank you for all the callbacks.
Hey, you set it up.
All right, so listen, so we're here to have a little conversation. Basically, every time I go meet with customers, they're a little bit stressed out that they're meeting with the sustainability lead, and they're saying, I'm already stretched thin enough. It's kind of like the starting point, and then we kind of talk through some of the issues. But construction companies are increasingly embedding sustainable practices in their work, and technology is an enabler of that. So where are you seeing that show up? I mean, I see it show up, but I have a biased view. So as we kind of build this into the technology, where does it show up for you and your
I was just telling them the technology isn't going to magically decarbonize things for them, right?
No,
so
no.
You sort of have to start in stages, I think. And let me start with a good example. You sort of have to start with a North Star and set some goals for how you meaningfully make progress in this, I think. And a good example is Turner Construction. So what they've done is to start with the projects of theirs that are $20 to $25 million and above, and said, okay, for those projects, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set a decarbonization goal. And the way that I'm going to achieve that is to make sure that for those projects, I'm going to include carbon calculations. First of all, implement digital takeoff, and then during the takeoff and estimation process, to include carbon calculations. And then I'm going to build on that and make sure that that flows upstream into the design stage as well, so your material selection is also appropriate, and you constantly have this feedback loop between the two stages. Yeah. And that's a starting point for them. And then they're going to follow through with other aspects that help them achieve their goals.
And I think the big theme that you were pointing to, Lalith, I was watching backstage as well, is the basically connecting the upstream kind of design processes to downstream construction processes. Because once you make that connection, you're able to make better decisions, and that feedback loop kind of helps to feed itself and kind of deliver better options earlier, right?
That's right, yeah. Exactly. It's that feedback loop that's important, because every time you make a choice in your takeoff and estimation, if you could feed that back to your design to make the appropriate adjustment, that just speeds up your decision making rather than having it be upstream when you've gone much further into procurement, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
So the faster you're able to react to it and have those options available, the better off your outcome is going to be. It's actually just like software. We have the same challenge as well.
Yes, yes, the coordinations of software implementation. I was just in a room with a bunch of customers, both in the kind of engineering and construction space, and it was basically all of their constraints between the kind of design phase and make phase were on coordination and data. And I think it is not a direct sustainability outcome, but it is a necessary prerequisite that we have better coordination, to your point, such that we can enable better outcomes.
That's right, that's right. And again, it's a journey that you embark on in reality, because you try to get more and more level of detail of data, right? Because we start with the basic carbon calculations during a takeoff at a certain level of detail. But you can see that you can push that further and further down so that all of your trades are also included in that. You start going down MEP contractors and start looking at their carbon footprints as well, their choices and so on. So eventually you're going to get to this, I think, a magical place where all of this data can be brought together so that you're sitting in whichever tool you're working in and looking at downstream processes and having the choices that you need to make. And I think we're starting to make that happen in our design tools by looking at dashboards that give you the impact of your choices downstream.
Yes. I won't go there yet, but it leads us to, like, how do we support focusing on outcomes and performance as opposed to just the deliverable overall. When I look at the teams that are doing this well, they do essentially two things. They're, as we just spoke about, kind of embedding some of the decision making earlier so that it flows downstream. And then subsequently, they're connecting carbon and cost, because those two things are inherently tied together. What are you seeing from teams who are doing this in your construction customer engagements?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and I'll pick one at the bleeding edge for that one.
Yeah.
And that's the data centers, right? We all know our energy prices are going up because of the data centers and the amount of energy they consume. But the other side of it is that there's a lot of technology that goes into data centers outside of construction that's absolutely cutting edge, that drives many, many construction choices. So for example, the GPUs that they're putting into data centers are much, much heavier than the ones that they had just a year or two ago, which means the foundations have got to be much more solid, which means more concrete has to be poured. Now, here's the challenge. Microsoft and Amazon and all of them have said we're going to go carbon neutral by 2030, which means all their choices are extremely impactful on whether they're going to achieve that objective or not. Now, add to that the fact that many of the materials that they choose are all cutting-edge materials that are not part of public EC3 databases. Now, how do you figure all of that into what is the total footprint of that data center that they're building?
Yeah.
And what are the costs associated with that? So this is where the volume of data and the significance of bringing it together is so crucial. And when I meet with these customers, that's what becomes obvious to me. That's why they value the platform, because without that, they simply could not do that, because not everything is publicly available in an EC3 database.
Oh, yeah.
They have all these cutting-edge materials and requirements that they have to bring in and calculate the impact of. And you know what? Carbon, out of all of construction's footprint, it's about 30% of the entire footprint in construction.
I mean, you brought up data centers. It's wild. I've been looking at the numbers in terms of data center build-outs, and I flew into Dulles Airport. And for those of you who have been to Virginia lately, as you fly into Dulles, the amount of new assets, essentially data centers that are being built, is mind-blowing. I grew up in the DC area. There used to be nothing out there. Now it's like a farm of data centers. It is wild. The fun fact, the energy consumption in the state of Virginia, 30% of it goes to data centers today. And I think that that's kind of an indicator of where we're going in the future. Most of the big hyperscaler owners, as you mentioned, have net zero requirements, right?
Yeah. They've
started with the energy side. So the AWSs, the Microsofts of the world are the largest procurers of renewable energy. Now they're starting to look at the physical footprint of that infrastructure. Right. Yeah. And the trillions of dollars that are being spent. I just saw a chart recently that the data center CapEx today is greater as a percentage of GDP than what we spent on the Marshall Plan, post-World War II, broadband internet access, and the US highway system.
Wow.
It's nuts. And so it's a huge opportunity from a construction perspective. But those owners are increasingly asking questions about carbon because of the commitments that they've made.
Yeah, I think it's more than carbon. I think these are illustrative of the volume of data, the number of variables that we have to deal with in the future, because that is where it's an inexorable path towards decarbonization. And the more you think about it, it's more data to deal with so that you have these options available up front when you make your decisions. And you need a platform with these connected workflows that go all the way from design through to the field and being able to feed that data back rapidly.
Yeah.
Without that, you just can't make it happen. It's just simple as that.
I thought you made some great points earlier about workforce, right? And it comes into this fundamental question around, there are workforce challenges in the construction industry. Is technology displacing? How are we addressing that? I mean, there's so much work to be had, as we just mentioned, around data centers, technology as an enabler. But how does this tie in with sustainability, Lalith? You were mentioning a little bit of this around the Uber Eats and the Gen Zers, but
yeah, actually, I'm part of the board of directors of the ACE program, which gets young people into the construction industry. And one of the challenges that we face is that people view construction as being somewhat slow-moving in technology and so on. But interestingly enough, when I visited customers, for example, on a job site, looking at drawings of where they were on a site and looking at those drawings, and the guy turns to me and says, you know where I am. Why do I have to pinch and zoom into this thing? Just show me the thing that maps to where I am and let me do my job and get out of here, right?
Yeah.
So they are expecting tools that are dead simple and as simple to use as Uber Eats and your apps on your iPhone. So that's what they're expecting. So when it comes to talent, it's not us we should be thinking about and how easy it is for us to do a job, but it's more about what do we need to attract this talent to be the next gen labor force. And the more the adoption of technology that we actually foster, the better off we're going to be with attracting these young kids into construction as the next gen labor force. Otherwise, we do have problems because we have a lot to build with a shrinking labor force.
Yeah. It's a big challenge. And with that, talk to me a little bit, Lalith, about international. Like, what are the things that we could kind of learn from? You mentioned digital product passports earlier. What are we seeing globally that we can bring back here to North America?
I mean, I think it depends. You sort of look at what is driving all of the change in Europe with the digital passport, product passports, and so on. It is about trying to get visibility into what you're doing with your material choices and so on. So when you have tracking of where a product comes from, and you can look at border transactions as we were talking about earlier, and taxing the movement of a high carbon intensity material across borders. That's one way to do it. You could just start taxing, saying, hey, that is actually bad for sustainability, so I'm going to tax it. But the other way to do it is by having visibility into that data so that when you order something, you know what the impact is going to be earlier on, and you make the appropriate choices. So you're transforming your sustainability or decarbonization from a legislative or a legal construct more into something that is a data choice that you make.
Yeah.
So I think that is something that I think is going to catch on, because that is just a smart play here, right? Not relying on legislation.
Well, and interestingly, from an Autodesk perspective, we also serve manufacturing industry customers, and that's standard because it's regulatorily driven, right? So there are mandates all over the world for all of your inputs into a manufacturing process to have transparency and traceability of that. We're just seeing it now enter the AEC industry, right? Overall.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I expect the future is here. It's just unevenly distributed. We're seeing it in certain pockets, and likely that is the direction that we are moving in.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Last question for you. One final question. If a contractor here is wondering where to start, what is the mindset shift that matters most for focusing on technology and sustainability?
Set a North Star and make a small step. Right? That's what I would say. Don't try to jump into it both feet first and just go crazy with digitization, because it is pretty daunting to connect everything and try to manage all of that data. But think about where the information is that is needed most in the portion of the work that you're doing. And is it in the field? Is it in your design offices? Whatever that is. And make sure that you simplify that process, make that data available. Take a small step towards that. I think that's the best way to get started.
Yeah. It doesn't require grand transformation,
Not an expensive, massive transformation, but you start small. I think that'll be a good way to do that.
Yeah. And we're seeing folks do that. It's like perfection is the enemy of the good, right? Like, let's just jump in and see what we can do.
That's right.
Even if it's project based, if it's one small step,
Yeah, if it's one small step, I'd say start with digital takeoff with your carbon analysis fitted in there. That's a simple thing to get started with, and you'll immediately see the impact of that, right? So it's one example.
Great. Well, thank you all. This has been a wonderful discussion. Much appreciate the opportunity to talk through some of this stuff. So I want to close very quickly with this. You've probably heard, I'm repeating myself, but carbon is becoming a constraint. Just like cost, just like schedule, the teams that win are the ones who can act early, before the first pour. Because carbon doesn't live in a spreadsheet, it is in the decisions, as Lalith and I have discussed, that folks make every day. Owners increasingly are not buying a building or a retrofit, they are buying outcomes or performance of a building. And when the data flows seamlessly across that value chain, from architects to contractors, from designers to manufacturers, from operators to owners, we can reduce waste, boost efficiency, sharpen decision-making for everyone involved. And that's how we move from these small silent improvements that we've been talking about to industry-wide transformation. And sustainability stops being a constraint and becomes a competitive advantage. Thank you. Thank you, Lalith.
Thank you.